All right, so trigonometry in Algebra 2 is limited to really kind of two areas. Number one, playing around with different angles on what's going to be graphs most of the time. They have further applications of that, but we don't really do much of that in here. You'll see it in physics classes and then more in like a pre-calc and calc if you take it. But just figuring out different angles that have the same sines, cosines, and tangents, because there's a lot of they repeat each other over and over and over again. And then also drawing graphs of the sine, cosine, and tangent curves. So we'll start out talking about angles, then we'll deal with some graphing at the end of this section of stuff that we're going to talk about. So the real basics, all right, hypotenuse, opposite, adjacent. And this stuff is done in geometry, all right, not that you're going to remember all of it, but it's done in geometry. So you always have to have an angle that you're talking about, all right? So it says relative to angle A, label the hypotenuse, opposite, and adjacent. Hypotenuse is always across from the right angle. All right, so across from the right angle. Across from right angle. All right, opposite side. Opposite is always across from the angle you are using. All right, so that means that the opposite is over here. And then the adjacent is the leftover side. All right, so label the hypotenuse first, the opposite second, the adjacent third. All right, you want to do this all the time with the very least the H, O, and A. All right, so we're going to be setting things up. It's very important to get the right ones figured out, and if we don't, then we're going to have all kinds of problems. This only works with a right triangle. All right, only works with a right triangle because it has to have a hypotenuse, and only a right triangle is going to have a hypotenuse. All right, so trig ratios, sine, cosine, and tangent. So sine A, cosine A, tangent of A. Please make sure that you always put a angle with your sine, cosine, tangent. And there's actually three more that we have not talked about in the past. All right, so the three that you should know. All right, sine is opposite over hypotenuse. Cosine is adjacent over hypotenuse. Tangent is opposite over, opposite over adjacent. Okay. And then there's cosecant, secant, and cotangent. All right. And these are the inverses of the things above them. All right. So cosecant is hypotenuse over opposite. Secant is hypotenuse over adjacent. And cotangent is adjacent over opposite. All right. So we're just taking those things right there and we're looking at how they compare to each other. All right, so secant and cosine are reciprocals. Cosecant and sine are reciprocals. And tangent and opposite are reciprocals. Okay? For right now, we're just trying to assign these values, all right, the numbers into the right places for each trig function. All right? Then we'll use them to figure out angles using our calculator. All right? We'll talk very briefly about the radian and degree switch back and forth. All right, that'll be in here someplace. And then basically just how to mess around with the calculator and use these things to figure out reference angles and actual angles and all of that stuff as we go through and talk about those things.